Well, my career actually has been a maze of experiences, and I'd just like to give a little bit of background history because it's quite fascinating in the sense of that I was only 10 years old and I was ill in bed at the time, and my uncle came round with a ukulele. And I hadn't sort of, well, I probably had heard of George Formby, but I hadn't taken very much note at the time. But the reason I mention this, because this is how it all began. It started off, it's like going from a ukulele to a mystical lady. And I changed the words around. Remember the song Cleaning Windows? Well, I changed the words to I wonder if I'm out my mind and realise it's now the time to write some words and hope they rhyme, and no more cleaning windows. So there you are. That's just how it began. And you all applaud. And so you may have gathered, many moons later, probably about the age of 15, I left school quite early and I developed this act. I'd learnt to play the ukulele, of course, and at school I learnt to play the trumpet, simply because I didn't like French classes, and I had the choice. It was either French or join the brass band with the boys, and so naturally I joined the band and I learnt to play the trumpet to a fairly good standard. And so at 15 I leave school, I've learnt all these instruments, I've learnt to sing, and I was tap dancing when I was little, and I developed this act for about half an hour. But that act really led me into all sorts of, it was amazing life, because I worked in over 30 countries. I worked with people like Des O'Connor, Ken Dodd, a show for Prince Charles along the way, and that was for about 15 years. So I had reached I was about the age of 29, and it got to a point that I'd worked on cruises, entertaining the army, and I felt that it'd come to a point where I couldn't really go any further, and a lot of the clubs in those days, I was brought up in the north of England, were beginning to close down. And I thought actually, or felt, that if I'd continued any longer, I would have had some kind of nervous breakdown. But little did I know at the time that this feeling of despair, you might say, was really a breakthrough. In that I saw a shooting star, and I felt that for the first time in my life I'd actually realised that there was something missing. It was like I'd been on a merry-go-round, and it's like Gurdjieff, the philosopher Gurdjieff, said that man is a machine until it becomes awake in consciousness. Well, I hadn't understood that philosophy at the time. I hadn't developed, I hadn't really ever heard the sound of silence. And it was at this point that I, through circumstances, I was transported, like on a magic carpet you might say, from Manchester, Lancashire at last, very down to earth, to Hazelmere, which is where I live now, in the woods. And like I said, for the first time I could hear this wonderful silence. And it dawned on me, slowly but surely, that this was a new world that was well worth exploring. Because intuitively it came to me that how can one ever hear their true calling or inner call, even though I'd been on this merry-go-round of show business, doing very well, I may say, very successful, earning a lot of money and having the time of my life. However, it was like saying, I could have said at the time, I've had a wonderful life, but only I wish I'd realised it sooner. And so how does one purify at this stage? How does one begin to hear this silence? And because when we're filled with the sound of pollution, we can't hear anything at all that that rings true. And I think it's about being true. At that point, it was about being true to myself. And so there I was in the woods, or here I am in the woods, and I begin to just develop this awareness, this different sort of awareness, where suddenly I felt a connection with nature spirits, with the elementals, and I began to write songs. It's like when one makes effort, and it's with effort and curiosity, I suppose, that one discovers the geography or curriculum of the soul. And for me, that came through writing songs, which is not that easy at the beginning. It's very frustrating, and it's I suppose it's like the chicken and the egg, and like when you're breaking through, there's a lot of pain and a lot of blood to begin with. And again, it's about purification, I suppose. And at that time, I hadn't understood about diet and nutrition, which I'm very interested in now. So just to continue at that point, then I slowly but surely wrote an album. And this particular album, which was my first one, was an audiobook called The Garden of Secrets. And I'd always loved the film The Secret Garden at the time. And living in the woods, I really felt the presence of an outside benevolent force, whether that was elementals or hierarchy of some or angels. I don't really know, but all I do know is that one night, this is a true story, I sat with my piano player at the time, Steve, from Manchester. He'd come up to Hazelmere, and he sat playing a few chords. This is how he wrote song. He'd play chords, and I'd begin to write a melody. And I went, the first band of fairies circle round in a ring. And Steve said, oh, that really fits. I said, fine, but what next? So I wrote, I opened up my anthology of poems, and just at random it came out, The Fairies Farewell. Oh, he says, oh, that's just a coincidence, because he's a real sort of Lancashire lad and very earthy, and he didn't believe in that kind of thing. And I hadn't really been open to that either, apart from when I was little, fairy stories. However, the story continues, and I travelled to Manchester to finish off this song, which was the first song off my album Lady of Light, sort of a jazzy sort of influence. And a knock comes at the door. And here it was. Here is the painting of fairies in a ring, here. I said to Steve, there must be some kind of synchronicity going on here. I said, there's a message that we're on the right track at least. But actually it was many moons later, maybe several years later, that I looked at this picture again and I thought, hang on a minute, this is identical, exactly the position where I used to live. There was a house, this was the main house here in this position. There was a tree exactly there. And I lived at the bottom of their garden, literally, with the fairies, as you could see. And that's where I'd written the song with Steve. it just goes to show that really, in a way, it's our thoughts and our intentions, I suppose. It's when I'm writing a song, it's almost like your imagination mingles with some kind of hierarchy, and kind of one receives in accordance perhaps with that quality of your desire or aspiration. And so really I'd created that particular reality which we do through our thoughts. It's very fashionable now, I suppose, to talk about thoughts as energy, but I think I've always I didn't realise it, but I was actually, it just happened naturally for me. It's just the way it went. And a lot of my influences from my songs have also come from the fact that I live literally a few minutes away from the Buddhist monastery. And again, I was introduced to the wonderful way of life, rather than religion, I think, of the Buddhist philosophy, which helped me understand that we have the lower emotions of ignorance and fear and anger and greed and so forth, which I think we all have inherent in us, and it's finding a way really to rise above those lower emotions of unconditional love, wisdom and compassion. And one can perhaps meditate, wait, co-create, but there had to be something more for me than just sitting and meditating and walking the woods. I felt I needed some action as well, and so I joined a group of Aikido for quite a long time. And I was even invited to produce a video also of Qigong. And it was there that I learnt about combining really the yin and yang, and going beyond duality, as we have the horns which represents duality, or seeing through two eyes, and it's learning to see through this one eye, this third eye, the one eye of the spirit, and sensing that we are one, and going beyond duality and separation. So I learned all these things through the Buddhist philosophy and the Tao, wrote lots of songs and poems about it, which maybe at this point I could just introduce one that was very inspired from all these studies or curriculums that I'd looked into. And it's titled One Chord, One Tune. One chord in the key of love, a psalm of ascension to the heavens above, suspended pain so long ago, the voice of a mother's ebb and flow, a choir of notes concealed, waiting to calibrate, hymns revealed, shimmering pastures emerald green, to a world of wonder, land of dreams, a magic mirror beyond, holy deeds in audible song. A falling star brings peace of mind, your silent beauty a melody sublime. Songs remember read, friends with stories left unsaid. A flower is given the chance to bloom, one chord of love, a goddess, one tune. So really I think that for me it's like just going back to the creation part. To me that is the, I think my intention really through all this stuff that I've gone through, and it's like a ladder, I suppose. It's like we climb up this level of evolution or consciousness for me, and I feel really what my job is to be a musical messenger, and to deliver whether it's songs or poetry, messages of beauty, truth and harmony. And people sometimes say, oh, I heard you're a channel, and I say, oh really? But there are moments when maybe one is channeling and tunneling, and so unless we purify in mind, body and spirit, I don't see how really the light can come through. And this moves me on just to tell you a little bit about what happened in between all this songwriting. I felt a little bit sort of selfish, because I thought, you know, it's important to not just to help yourself and to become illuminated so I can sort of help other people, but I thought there has to be something more. And so I began the Inspiration Society about 10 years ago. And I had thousands of letters, and I had concerts, and what I wanted to do, I thought, if these songs are of beauty, truth and harmony, how can you sing these lovely songs in some sort of nightclub or not so beautiful place? So I used to hire little chapels and beautiful churches, and I invited other singers and writers and poets and dancers, and it was really lovely. If only I could have got more people there. But you know, I was given a sign, because the next morning, actually the evening, I'd had a dream. And in the dream, somebody came to me and said, you think nobody's there, but actually you have your invisible friends there. And a man came up to me where I teach at the Theosophical Society, and he came to me with a badge with a fairy on it, and I'd seen it in the dream the night before. So I'd had so many affirmations, really, that nothing goes unnoticed. And just at those times when you think you're alone, we're never alone, really. And I felt this so strongly with these energies, one might say. And so next, I suppose, I wrote, after the Inspiration Society, I just decided to return to my roots. And I started completing the album Lady of Light, which shortly you will hear a song. The last song on the album is called The Veil. And the first one was called Beyond the Veil. It should have been perhaps the other way round. And I had these two sides to me. I had this sort of jazz side, because I'd learnt to play jazz as a kid at school. And I also had this sort of spiritual or inspirational side. And I think, again, it's like blending the two poles together, that yin and yang energy. And so we create this sort of Tao, this unity. And I think it's good to keep the both sides. We have the male and the female.
stillness love remembers. Through the veil, the garden of your soul.
I lived in Malta. I had a house in Malta and a house here in Hazelmere. And in Malta, I wrote a lot of songs there, but also I had my own radio series. And the radio series was called A Journey of Inspiration. And then the second series was called Future Medicine. And there I was given the opportunity to interview many people, medical doctors who had turned to complementary practices and beyond, extraordinary people, people that use sound for to heal people, because what I'd learnt was that it's the frequency and the intention that brings about the healing. And what comes to mind just at that point is just to introduce, because I now teach myself healing with sound and movement, because I'd learnt a lot of Qigong and Falun Gong over the years and wanted to combine sound and movement, which I feel is very important. I also teach conventional singing too, for people who prefer or at that stage. So just returning to what I was saying, this is a crystal bowl, and very important sound this produces. It's made of quartz and silica. I'll just let you hear it as I'm talking. The reason I suppose that this sound is special, and whether you use a gong or the voice too, it actually passes through the physical body and penetrates on a molecular or a cellular level, and it begins to restore resonance in the chakras, in the 7 or 8 chakras that we have or beyond. It is multi-dimensional where the healing takes place, and basically it helps to bring back life force, a little bit like when one is having acupuncture, and so it releases stagnant energy. So slowly but surely I was doing this radio series on natural medicine, and I became very interested myself in nutrition, and recently I became qualified, or I did a short training, should we say, in kinesiology, which is a way of using or testing muscles to see whether one is intolerant to milk or wheat or sugar, for example. And also I've learnt a lot about mental health, which I'm very interested in, because I teach singing to 1 or 2 people with that area of problem. And I learnt that by using mega doses or optimum nutrition, particularly with niacin and vitamin B3, zinc and C, although don't quote me, one would go to a professional nutritionist to check this out, one can achieve wonders, particularly with schizophrenia, which I think if I had my time again, I would probably like to do something like that, where it included sound and nutrition, which is probably what I'm already doing up to a certain extent. But I think it's important to follow the heart, because when you follow your heart, I suppose that's when the rewards come. And so really, to bring you up to date with everything, just if I can put it into a bubble, or if there is such a thing as conclusion, because I do believe we're eternal, immortal and infinite. And I'd learnt all these things really from singing and speaking on nature spirits and angels as well at the Mind, Body and Spirit festivals. So much confusion as well, I have to say, for people. At the time I thought, oh my gosh, I'm interested in so many aspects here. But again, it's listening and finding your gift, your own personal gift, and shining your light. And for me, singing, it illuminates the spirit and the movements. It's really important to expand our aura. Whereas when we're in fear and ignorance, we tend to contract. And it's when we contract that I think we're more, I think that we kind of invite perhaps the hungry ghosts in preference to the celestial realms. And this is what I'm really interested in, is really feeling this feeling of innocence again, and magic and wonder and joy, of course. And so I learned a lot at the festivals, but what I probably learned more than anything was really to be true to myself. Before I conclude my story, I'd just like to bring myself back into the here and now, because it's here that we can manifest our dreams. And as the American Indian said, and also it's very important to be earthed, and it's the first thing I do when anybody comes in and I begin a lesson. We start with the breathing, and I use sounds, a little bit of sound for healing. Like, for example, one can use the seed syllable sounds, which is what the Indians would do, and it may be ma or hum, which is for the heart chakra. So there are different sounds to tone different chakras in the body. So that's what I do. I teach the sound healing workshops, and also in combination, the other side of me, as I said, was the jazz side. Shortly I'll be returning to California. About 2 years ago I was invited to do a concert there at Clint Eastwood's jazz radio station, and I'll be working with my piano player Vabe Iago, who is originally from Brazil, and a quintet, and I'll be doing a series of jazz clubs and just doing my usual sort of singing jazz songs, which is quite another world. But I feel that my world really is, I suppose it's like Gandhi said, one has to make, he said, my life is my message, and that's what I'm aspiring to make my life my message. And this is what came through that I'd like to just complete with. Your gift to embrace. Be careful what you wish for, as it will come true. All it requires is one conscious thought of loving intention. And hey presto, we enter into a world of eternal possibilities. When we surrender to thy will, and not the illusion of my will, it is like giving nectar to a higher force, where we receive in accordance with the quality of our desires. Naturally, it is permissible to have goals with a purpose, providing we are not attached to the outcome. Aha. Easier said than done, I suppose, times. But until we reach this level of understanding or consciousness and liberation, we must wait, co-create, and meditate. Eventually, with much work, patience, and self-remembrance, as Gurdjieff would say, we are given the golden key that spins us into this magical kingdom, a world in between and beyond. We reach a sacred place with no more longing, no more pain, and no blame. What was once unseen becomes abundant, and hearts so pure and free from suffering. The past is history, the future a mystery, and the present a gift of the here and now. A timeless space where all your wishes come true, through the grace of divine will, where nothing goes unnoticed, as I said earlier. It is the gift of a union where love has no duality, no hate. The key question is, though, how do we remain on this plane of permanent joy and wonder when no one judges and accepts you for who you really are? The answer is simple, yet true. We are all given a gift to embrace, to discover, to share, and to elevate hearts that may have become veiled. Because I remember it was Ramdas, who I met in California, and he was saying that I remember writing a song, and it was, when the heart is veiled, every door is closed above, take away the fear, fill me up with love, what I think is what I am. And it was about being in love with the beloved. And this is the stage of consciousness or evolution that one would hope to be attaining towards. And so, whether we're a poet or a shoemaker, we have to practice and polish our gift. This is what I'm working on, you know. And treat it like a redeemed precious jewel. And then eventually, one is released from the bonds of fear and ignorance, and the door is opened. The door is opened to the gift of everlasting peace, light, and unconditional love. I'd like to read another poem, if I may, called The Call. Yet though lost in the caverns of my mind, I have been filled with much gladness. Some of my dreams are still unseen, with melodies still unsung. Yet I becomes peace, a kiss in the present, amidst the winds softly blowing on the wings of gossamer. My voyage began in its orbit of suffering, when from the heart of youth came the call, into the soul of silence, spiraling rings of space, touching the void into an ancient world of wisdom, the voice of no opinion, where love has no hate. Rejoice in the freedom, one eye as the witness. To thine own self be true, then you shall find both me and you. Well, what you're listening to now is the introduction to my album Lady of Light. You can see the sunflower. I love sunflowers. Ever since I went on the course with Drumbelow Melchizedek, which was called The Flower of Life, I just very drawn to sunflowers. Now, Lady of Light was actually inspired at the time just after Princess Diana died, who I really thought was an amazing person and hopefully didn't come for no reason. I'm sure she didn't. And these words came to me: live on forever, let us embrace what we have gained. Now honour the gift and let it flow. Your work was done, and heaven knows. And then it's, with love, our Queen of Hearts, pray we'll never part. A rose now in our hearts, a child without desire. Lady of Light, we will remember your healing smile, a bringer of grace. of light and beauty too. Selfless work with true compassion, with love straight from the heart. Lady of light, lifting us higher, star in the sky, she'll never die. So there you have it. You can buy it in the gift shop if you like. I want to thank Bob so much for inviting me here, and of course Tess Burrows for being the catalyst.